Hi, everybody. My name is Carl Darden, and I'd like to welcome and thank all of you for joining us today here on Navy Sports Central. I'm your host, and this is the official podcast of the Navy Sports Nation, where we take a deeper dive into Navy sports. In this episode, we're going to be joined by two very knowledgeable guests who will give us a crash course on the Navy Rugby program. I also found out that there have been serious discussions about elevating both the men's and the women's teams to varsity status, so we'll get an update on that as well. But first, we'll get you caught up on what's going on with Navy swimming, men's basketball, and wrestling as the winter sports season starts to wind down. So please stick around. We've got a lot to talk about. All right, we are back, and it is great to have you with us. Whether you are a regular listener or you're checking us out for the first time, thanks for making us part of your day. Since we have a lot of ground to cover, let's get right into our update, and I'm going to lead with the men's and women's swimming and diving teams. Last weekend, they both added another Patriot League championship to their total. It was the 10th straight title for the women and the 20th overall, while the men have won their 18th consecutive title. And even more impressive is the fact that no other men's team has won the championship since Navy joined the Patriot League back in, let's do the quick math here, 2004, we'll call it, yeah. So really another impressive performance by both teams. The women just ran away with it. I mean, they ended up winning by like 400 points or something like that. And the men finished with, I think they were about a little over 100 points ahead of the second place team. So great job. There were a total of 31 athletes on both teams that earned all league honors. I'll include the link to the article in the show notes, but I did want to mention 5 in particular that had terrific seasons. First, on the women's side, Haley Harris was selected as the Rookie of the Year. She was the 400 individual medley champion. Next, we had Hannah Monto, who was recognized as the Women's Diver of the Year, having won both the 1 and 3 meter diving events at the championships. And finally, Sydney Harrington was named the Women's Swimmer of the Year. She was the Patriot League champ in the 50 freestyle as well as the 100 and 200 butterfly. On the men's side, Ethan Tack was named the League Swimmer of the Year. He won 3 races at the Patriot League championships, those being the 200 and 400 individual medley and also the 200 butterfly. And then finally, the Rookie of the Year on the men's side was Everett Andrew. He earned that recognition by way of winning the 200 and 500 freestyle races. Both teams will be competing in the ECAC Regional Championships, which actually start today, and that will be followed by the NCAA Championships next month. Okay, now let's check in with men's basketball. They locked up the number 2 seed in the Patriot League tournament after beating Loyola the other day, in actually pretty dramatic fashion. Sean Yoder got a steal and went in for the layup with less than, it was about 6 seconds to go to give the Mids a 52-50 win. But the really big game was a couple weeks ago with that rematch against Army, and this time the star was on the line. I thought the team responded really well after that crushing loss to the Black Knights in Annapolis back in January. The game was really, really physical. From the very beginning, there was bodies flying all over the place after loose balls. Solid screens were being set, hard drives to the basket. I mean, you name it, it was there. Both teams were just playing at full throttle the whole game. The Mids didn't shoot the ball all that well, but they made the big shots when they needed them, and the defense did a great job limiting Army's opportunities in the second half. Final score was 52-49. Tyler Nelson led the Mids with 16 points, Daniel Deaver had 10, and Sean Yoder hit a huge three-pointer off of an assist by Deaver with less than 2 minutes to go. That gave Navy an 8-point lead, and they hung on from there. The Mids closed things out against Colgate this weekend. The Raiders really caught fire in the second half of the year and won the regular season title going away. They'll finish the year with 15 or 16 conference wins, depending on how they do against the Mids. This will be a good chance for Coach DeChellis to see how the team measures up after getting handled pretty easily by Colgate about 6 weeks ago. The Mids had a really off night, so I'm sure they broke down that game film and made the necessary adjustments. All right, the last team we'll be looking at is Navy Wrestling. They only had the star meet against Army left on their schedule before the regional championships start the first weekend in March. The Mids had a chance to wrestle in front of their home crowd, which was great. And I really do think it was a difference maker. I watched the matches on ESPN+, and even though there weren't a lot of crowd shots, you could definitely hear them. Early on, things didn't look so good, though. The Mids lost the first 2 matches at 141 pounds and 149 pounds, and they were down 6-0 before you even knew what was going on. Then Andrew Cerniglia won his match at 157 pounds to get the mids on the board. I'm going to get into a lot more detail on his match during our mid-watch segment later in the show. After his win, Navy's Val Park evened the score at 6 apiece by shutting out his opponent 3-0 at 165 pounds. Then the mids ran the table in the last 5 matches of the night, which included a dominating performance by freshman Josh Coderhand at 133 pounds. He won his match 13-2 to seal a 22-9 win for Navy, giving them their second straight star over the Black Knights. All right, that wraps up our winter sports update, and our deep dive segment is next. Okay, it is time for our deep dive segment, and today we're going to get a bit of an education on the sport of rugby. This has always been one of the more popular club sports at Navy. You'll recall that the women's team won the national championship back in December, and the men are about to kick off their spring season. Now, I'm going to tell you straight up that aside from what I learned from Sarah Skinner during our conversation a couple of months ago, I know nothing about rugby at all. So I'm happy to be joined by 2 former rugby players who also happen to be my classmates. Both of them played on the team for 3 years, and they were nice enough to carve out some time to educate us all on a sport that sometimes has been described as being an elegant form of violence. So please welcome Gardner Howe and Larry Clark to Navy Sports Central. All right, guys, it's really great to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. I really appreciate it.
You bet, Carl. Thanks for doing this, and thanks for putting a spotlight on Navy Rugby.
All right.
Navy Rugby.
Yeah. Okay. I guess we can just go ahead and jump right into it. Larry, I'm going to start with you. And it all comes down to when you guys got interested in playing rugby, because obviously, and I mentioned this to Sarah Skinner when I spoke with her a couple of months ago when I did the feature on the women's rugby team winning the national championship. I'd asked her, hey, when we were growing up, I mean, there was like youth basketball, youth volleyball, youth soccer. There's no youth rugby, right? I mean, so when did you guys get exposed to it for the first time? And when did you start playing? It may have been even when we got to Annapolis. I don't know. So Larry, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I was a football player in high school and 3-sport varsity athlete in high school, which is one of the reasons I got accepted to the Naval Academy. But I was a big fish in a little pond going to in Elma, New York. But going to the Naval Academy, I wasn't big enough, fast enough, or to play varsity football. So, but I still wanted to compete and beat people up. So I boxed during plebe summer, and then the fall came, and I said, the next best thing is rugby, and what is this game? And I learned from there. We had both battalion rugby, which was battalion intercollegiate, inter-brigade sport. And I think I started there and then moved up to playing on the club team. And this, I might have been in the spring of plebe year, now that Gardner jogged my memory.
All right, very good. So Gardner, how about you? How'd you get started playing rugby? Was it the same kind of situation as Larry where you started playing at Annapolis?
Yeah, it was very similar. I think I grew up and was kind of vaguely aware of that mostly overseas sport, rugby. But I went to the Naval Academy, and at the time I wanted to be a pole vaulter and maybe a decathlete if I could get there. But that was kind of how I finished up high school sports. Mm-hmm. And so I remember at the end of plebe summer when you kind of start trying out for the varsity sports, I remember doing a couple of vaults for the track coach, Al Cantello. And I remember him he told me, hey, you're too fat and you're too slow. Lose 10 pounds, work on your sprints, come back and see me in the spring. And I was absolutely crushed. And then we had a bunch of upper class, second class and first class that played rugby in our company. Actually, a couple youngsters too. Yeah, the 83 guys. And introduced me to the sport, fell in love with it, and was just so grateful for that turn of events.
Okay, it sounds good. So I'm kind of like a total novice when it comes to watching rugby as a sports fan. So I tried to get a little bit smart on it before I brought you guys on. And what I did was I pulled up some video of Navy Rugby from just a couple of years ago. And it looks like, based on what I could tell, the main I guess, team event that they compete in is the 15 on 15, although I know that there's more. So I wonder if you could kind of speak to that a little bit, Gardner, in terms of how that breaks down by position when you go 15 on 15.
Sure. Yeah. There's two broad groups out on the field, the forwards and the backs. The forwards are generally kind of if we're making analogies to American football, kind of like the linemen, probably known for power and strength. And then the backs would be more akin to receivers and or running backs, more known for maybe ball handling skills and speed rather than power. Although, as you've seen in those videos, the athletes across the board, it's a pretty unique combination of power, speed, and some nice technical skills.
Mm-hmm.
But the forwards are the ones that you will see in those events like scrums and lineouts where they're competing for the ball to restart it. And then the backs are the ones that are generally involved in more of the kicking game or the passing game and trying to advance the ball downfield through evasive running, hopefully fast running. I don't know if you'd like to go through the different positions across the board and the names of them, but that's a broad overview.
Okay. All right. That'll work. Larry, now what specific, here's what we can do. Larry, what was your specific position? And you can kind of go into the details in terms of what you did throughout the course of a game.
Yeah, I was out on the wing, which is one of the backs, as Gardner just described. So we would, the forwards would possess the ball and try to pass it out to the backs, and we would lateral it out the wing. You see those plays happen quite a bit, and our goal is to try to get it, differential in positions on the opponent. Or find an opening we could get through. But Gardner was a fly half. He'd pass it to the inside center pass it to the outside center would pass it to the wing. That's how you're progressed out of the wing, and you try to get imbalances on the defense by running switches, switching that up, skipping the pass. Sometimes you'd skip from the inside center out all the way out to the wing, and then back again. Every pass has to go backwards. It can't go forward.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't catch the pass and the ball goes forward, that's called a knock on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's you turn the ball over to the other team when that happens. So outside center and most of the wing is just trying to press the defense for openings and get past. You can also kick the ball forward. So there's no forward passing in rugby. It's all backwards, but you can kick the ball forward, and that's a live ball.
Okay.
And the wing would be involved in doing that, try to kick it over the opponents, and then maybe take advantage of that live ball past the defense, if you can break through that way.
Okay. All right, cool. So let's talk a little bit about scoring. All right. I remember when I was talking with Sarah that she indicated that when you score, it's called a try, and you physically actually have to touch the ball across the end zone. When you get into the end zone, you touch it down to the ground, which kind of makes me wonder. I wonder if that's where spiking came up in American football. I wasn't really sure. Yeah. But anyway, is there any other way to score, and how much are the points worth? The try's worth 5 points, I remember, but what about everything else?
Yeah, once you score the try, you back up from the place where the try was scored. So if the try was scored way out on the sideline, you'd have to back up from the sideline and kick the extra point conversion. And that's worth 2 points. And it gets progressively easier the closer to the center of the field that you score your try on.
I see.
So you'll see some runners run into the try zone and not touch the ball down until they get to the center.
Oh. Because
they're trying to score the try in the center of the field to give their kicker an easier kick for the 2 extra points. And then anytime on the field, you can drop the ball and kick it through the uprights for 3 points. That's called a drop kick. Doug Flutie just did one of those. That's still legal in NFL football.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he did it right at the end of his career. He did a drop kick, which was That was our rugby players. All the rugby players were like, yeah, I can't believe you did that. I didn't know it was still in the rules for the NFL, but it's definitely in the rules for rugby. And then there are penalty kicks, which if certain penalties, the referee can award a penalty kick to one team, and if you kick the ball through the uprights, then you get 3 points as well.
Okay. All right, cool. All right. Yeah, you guys did a great job describing exactly what you're looking to accomplish on offense when, by moving the ball laterally and creating some mismatches there on the defensive side. So I appreciate that. Now, Gardner, the one thing, and I shared this with you guys before we kick things off, but this whole notion of a scrum is something that I need some serious education on, because since there was not any commentary on the video that I was watching, I didn't really understand when those situations come up. So I was wondering if you can kind of run through that for us.
Yeah, so the scrum is used to kind of restart play generally after a minor infraction.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a couple of related, I guess you'd call plays or events on the field, a ruck and a maul, that are like scrums, but we can touch base on those in a second. So the scrum is a set play. You have two props, generally your lowest center of gravity, heaviest kind of guys, and they prop up a player in between them called the hooker. And he's named the hooker because he uses his legs to sweep into that tunnel that's formed when the two teams come together in an attempt to hook that ball and then slide it back into his team's side of the scrum.
Okay.
But so that's your front line, two props and a hooker in between them. You've got the two locks, or the second rows, that have their heads between the hips of those three players. And then you've got the number 8, who's got his head between the two hips of the two locks. So it's kind of that 3-2-1. And you've got two players called wing forwards that are on the outside of the locks. And generally the scrum, they are trying to generate power, control their territory, control that tunnel when the ball comes in it. Once the ball is brought into the scrum by the scrum half, the goal, as I said, it's to hook the ball back onto your side and then kind of maintain possession of that ball.
Mm-hmm.
Your players can then, if they are overpowering the opposing team's scrum, they can literally drive the ball forward, usually with the number 8, controlling the ball, where he is both driving forward, but also slight taps of the ball and keeping it within the scrum. So if you're dominating the other team, you can literally drive the ball forward and gain yardage that way. But at some point, and it's a tactical decision generally made by the scrum half will reach in, pull the ball out, and then deliver it to the fly half to start a running play with the backs. We can kind of go into rucks and mauls, but let me just, Carl, did I paint enough a picture for you there?
Yeah, and actually the question I was going to follow that up with was, when you consider that somebody is kind of tasked with figuring out a way to get the ball out to their side, when we're talking about chances of injury and stuff like that with those massive people moving back and forth, does that occur very often, or is everybody kind of dialed in enough to know, okay, well, we know what's going on here, and we're not going to start trampling people left and right, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think it's probably fair to say that, the scrum is a set piece. So the referee, when you see the two sides, he'll say ready, set, and then the two sides grab each other, and then they'll say bind, and then they'll put all their weight on each other, and then they'll stabilize themselves kind of, and then the scrum half is ready to put the ball in. So generally during that, while there's immense pressure in those, the amount of pressure on the props' shoulders that are engaging with the full power of the other team, there's potential for injury there, but it's kind of a set piece.
Okay.
And then there's a lot of coordination between the scrum half and the number 8 about how we're going to get the ball out. So they've got their own codes and their own ways in which the the number 8 is going to expose the ball and make it easy for the scrum half to get it in a controlled manner so that he could pass it out to the wing. Yeah, I'd say there's probably a greater chance of injury in more of the non-set pieces and more of the open play where there's a bit of momentum built up before there's kind of like contact between the players.
Okay.
Yeah, because the scrum does collapse sometimes, and that's usually the ref will call that a dead play and award the ball to one team or the other. If one team causes the scrum to collapse, it can be awarded to the other team. So
okay,
you want that control in a scrum.
All right. Okay. Good stuff. Yeah, I just learned something. Good deal. All right, Gardner, you talked about the rucks and the mauls, if that's the proper terminology. If you could explain a little bit about how those differ, that I think that would kind of complete the picture for people who are just kind of new to the game like myself.
Yeah. I mean, one of the, we started off by talking about offensive and defensive players. And I think one of the great things about rugby is that, that there's not a bunch of specialized players outside forwards and backs, and they all share the basic skills, even if you're a forward or a back. And so it's a very, very fluid game. When a player makes contact with an opposing player and gets tackled, you've got a couple of options, but the play continues. It's not like, a next set of downs. And so if I'm running forward and I get tackled, what I will generally do is try to turn my body and present the ball back towards my team. And when I make contact with the ground, the rules say I've got to release the ball. What my teammates will be trying to do will be to set up a ruck, an R-U-C-K, a ruck on top of me. And so as I make contact with the ground and release the ball, if they bind onto me, they're kind of building a wall with me at the base. And the ball and that wall become kind of the onside, offside line. Mm-hmm. So the opposing team will bind on their side of the ball and try to drive my team over the ball.
Okay.
And if they're able to do so, they've won the ruck. And then their scrum half will reach in, take possession of the ball, and bring it out back for a play. My team will be attempting to create that wall, control it, and so you've got kind of, it's kind of the equivalent of an in situ scrum, where you're building that formation, you're then trying to drive the opposing players, control possession of the ball, allow your team's offense to then set up, and then present that ball out for the next phase of play. And the difference between a ruck and a maul is that if I go in, another player hits me, has stopped me, but he is not taking me to the ground, and I've simply turned to present the ball to my team, other of my players can come, bind onto me, create that wall, but I'm able to hold on to the ball because I haven't made contact with the ground. And so if you've kind of got that moving wall of offensive players that are bound together, that are kind of stopping one phase of play and getting ready to create the opportunity for the next, that's considered a maul. Mm-hmm. And again, the basic premise is to gain control and momentum, allow your offense to set up, and then present the ball back out to the next phase of play when you're ready.
Okay.
And Carl, you might have seen in that highlight reel on the Navy website, some of these mauls can run down the field 15 yards.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're close to the try line, you can use a maul to get that momentum and drop the ball right into the try zone and score a try right out of the maul, if you get that kind of momentum going forward.
Right. Okay. So, Larry, this question's for you, and you kind of touched on it a little bit in terms of protective gear, but I think it was when we were still offline. But I noticed that you have the scrum caps, right? And presumably, and I learned from Sarah that this is kind of like wrestlers to prevent the whole cauliflower ear thing from occurring, that sort of thing. But I'm pretty sure you guys went with mouth guards, unless you guys have a really good dental plan or something. but I'm surprised that there aren't more serious injuries considering the size of these players and, the speed that can be generated. So what kind of gear is allowed versus not allowed? And we talked about injuries perhaps, occurring most often in, in uncontrolled situations as opposed to a set piece like a scrum. But I was wondering if you can kind of speak to that a little bit. Where are the injuries most likely to occur? What kind of injuries would you most likely see?
Well, yeah, as Gardner said, the game is a flow from offense to defense. The ball's going back and forth. There's no reason to stop somebody dead in their tracks in rugby. You can let them, you can tackle them gradually. They can gain 3 or 4 yards as long as your goal is to gain control of the ball. So the tackle in rugby is a lot different than it is in football. I learned that my freshman year when I had a minor separation of both shoulders by tackling the way I did in football. You don't tackle the way you do in football or you get a separated shoulder. You tackle gracefully, you bring someone down, let their momentum pull them down to the ground. So that's the main reason why you don't see a plethora of concussions. And the smart players have learned how to tackle without separating their shoulders, things of that nature. I think there's an association that dictates what you can and can't wear on the field, and most hard plastic pads are not allowed. There are some soft padding that can be worn on the shoulders now, which I don't think we did in anybody wore that kind of thing when I was.
Yeah, I don't remember that at all either.
But when we played one of the alumni games, like the 20th year alumni game, I was crazy enough to go out on the field, and we played a Navy team, and they took their jerseys off, and they had slightly padded jerseys underneath undershirts. And I thought, that's not supposed to be allowed, but it is. No, it is allowed. It can't be any hard plastic. You can wear a slip-over knee brace, but it can't have any hard plastic on it. You can't wear the things that the NFL wears with all the metal in it and everything like that. That's all not allowed. But beyond that, there's not a whole lot. You can't wear tights, no long pants or tights. It's got to be above your shorts. And
all right. Okay, so you guys have mentioned the flow of the game on a couple of occasions, and one of the questions I want to kind of jump back to, I asked you earlier, hey, how did you end up getting into rugby? Now, the next question is, what do you like the most about it? So, Gardner, we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I think my appreciation for the sport has changed over the years. When Larry and I were playing, for me, it was camaraderie and just the sport itself and what it combined. This physicality, but it was also like there was a premium on some of the technical skills. So your passing skills, your kicking skills, you could make a big difference by advancing those skills, but it was still a pretty raw sport. So there was an attraction between kind of the power and the endurance, strength, but also the skills. But it's kind of funny, Larry and I both remained pretty active in the Rugby Alumni Association and helping continue to advance the sport at the academy. And for me, it's what, it is so aligned with the Naval Academy's mission about developing midshipmen kind of morally, mentally, and physically to be leaders in the naval service. This is probably common to all sports. So it's not unique to rugby, but rugby does an incredibly good job of building a sense of team, building a sense of grit to get you through adversity, it created this kind of a framework for thinking about unified effort that just translated extremely well into the kind of the joint military service in the years to come. And so I just think it does an amazing job of developing an individual to be a leader in our military, which ultimately is what the academies are all about.
Right. Larry, what about you?
I like the endurance aspect of it. It's not a short football play. I've played football in high school, and it was set play, run it, stop, huddle. Rugby is 2 40-minute halves, almost continuous play, with exception of short stops for a try or for setting up a scrum or when the ball goes out of bounds. Otherwise, the plays can last for long periods of time, and endurance comes into play. The skills that Gardner mentioned come into play. Kicking the ball past a tired defender is always fun. And it's just the creativity and the flow and the endurance and the continuous play was just really attractive for me coming out of a high school football career.
Okay. All right. So the other question I had was just thinking back to when you played and looking at how you prepared for an upcoming team. Obviously, when I think about sports like, basketball or football or something like that, you scout the opposing team, you kind of develop a game plan depending on how that goes. So I guess my question is, when you were getting ready for an upcoming opponent, is this something that you just want to fine tune what you do all the time offensively? Or do you kind of make a plan based on the strengths of the other team and figure out how to exploit that? Or how does that work? I'm just kind of curious. Gardner, we can start with you.
Yeah. I think in our day, and I'd be very interested, Larry, in what your recollections were too. In our day, we were a lot less sophisticated than the Navy team of today. Mm-hmm. And I think we basically tried to do what we did, tried to do it well, and then hoped for the best. And generally we were often a much more physical team than the opponents, and that in the second half, our endurance would kind of press on, especially with some of the older kind of like adult clubs that we would play against. But I do know that the Navy teams of today, they're pretty sophisticated in both understanding who their opponents are, strengths and weaknesses, developing a strategy, and analyzing their last games and working on weaknesses. They're doing that to an extent that we couldn't even recognize based on our experiences.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Larry, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with Gardner. I don't know that we did a lot of pre-gaming. I think the coaches might have seen weaknesses that we could exploit during a game maybe, and they would encourage us to try to get the ball out to the wing, for example, when they thought our winger was far superior to their wing on the outside. But as far as pre-game planning and skill sets before the game to exploit an opponent's weakness, I don't remember a lot of that happening. It was just get out there and let the game flow and exploit the weaknesses as you find them on the field.
Okay. All right. So got a few more questions here before we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and take care of some other things. But one of the things that I've appreciated, and I knew this even going back to when we were at school, and it's that Navy Rugby has got a really, really loyal following. And it's not all that different from other sports like rowing and so forth that are a little bit, they fly beneath the radar, but you've got some really, really skilled athletes playing those sports. So it was kind of nice to hear. Now, we haven't been able, and well, actually, I'll ask you, Gardner, if we've got some additional information on this, but I was talking with Brian Goodrow, who's our class president, a while back. And I think it was back in December I was speaking with him. And he happened to mention that both men's and women's rugby are being considered for varsity status. And first of all, that would be fantastic if that was the case. Secondly, if it is the case, I was wondering, and like I said, Gardner, we'll start with you, if you do have any more details on that. And for the casual fan, what would you tell them about rugby to encourage them to maybe watch a little bit more frequently?
Yeah, so I am not tracking an official announcement yet, but all indications are that both the athletic director, the Naval Academy Alumni Association, and the Athletic Association are all continue to be supportive of turning rugby into a varsity sport. And the biggest piece, kind of the biggest driver, was whether or not there was going to be an initial capital investment that would allow the Athletic Association to initiate and then sustain the first few years of operation. And the last that we heard from the Navy Rugby Alumni Association is that we exceeded that goal, which was a $4 million goal over several years, wow. But $2 million of it probably in the last year when it got really serious about the varsity status. And all indications are that that goal, either in direct gifts or pledges, has been met. And there's an expectation that sometime in the spring we're going to hear that formal announcement, which will be, in some ways it'll change the experience that Larry and I had, because there was something very organic and I don't know another word to describe it, freewheeling about a very serious but club-oriented sport. There was a neat and fun social aspect of it that was a big attraction. And so some of that will probably change as we head into more varsity status. But I think the very nature of the sport, the individuals that are attracted to it on the men and the women's side, they're going to maintain that piece of it. But now they're going to have the coaching, the athletic training, administrative resources, and some other things that'll allow us to compete at the national level.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So now, Larry, I'll go to you for the second half of that question, and that is, so for people, again, like myself, who are fairly new to rugby, and with news coming down the road that it could possibly become a varsity sport, the Brigade, I think, they're going to latch onto this fairly quickly because they're right there and that sort of thing locally. But, for streaming events, that sort of thing, and for people to kind of, engage on ESPN Plus if they happen to carry a game or something like that, what would you tell the casual fan to kind of get them interested in watching rugby a little bit more?
I think there are some, get a little bit of knowledge of the rules and how that flow is happening, what's really happening in the flow. Read about it a little bit. There's so many resources now online to read about rugby a little bit, because then when you're watching the game and catching a game on TV or online, it makes a whole lot more sense to you. You get to see the beauty of it when you understand what is going on. But there's so many more resources now to watch rugby. It's been great to see. There's a rugby channel on cable. There's obviously tons of YouTube videos and things of that nature that weren't around just 10 years ago. So there's ample opportunity to start watching a lot of rugby if you want to. And I'd say just enjoy the beauty and
right.
It's a fun game to watch once you understand what's happening, and the size and the speed of the athletes today. I would not go back and play an alumni game on rugby right now, because I see those guys. It's unbelievable, the size and speed. And we just had the Buffalo Bills just had a rugby player trying out for the team and played in a few preseason games and stuff like that. He ended up scoring a couple of touchdowns in preseason games.
Wow.
It was great to see, but it's the transition of those athletes now. They're equal to the Division I football, I think. And it's great to see.
Right.
Carl, can I jump in on that one also, just real quick?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. So there was another. As Larry was saying that, it was making me think too. I think a casual or new viewer to the sport, if you're watching the players kind of around the player with the ball instead of the player with the ball, you can start to gain an appreciation for what is like so cool about the sport. Because it's often, it really is. It's less about what that person with the ball is doing and what everyone else is doing in support, and how they're preparing, because it is a game of flow. It's a game of transitions. And so one of the things that has just really struck me that keeps me just so motivated is that kind of the tagline of the Navy Rugby Alumni Association is "with you." They have a "with you" dinner every year. And it really is the essence of the sport, that a player running downfield, that's great, but it's the teammates that are prepared to bind on in a ruck or a maul, or positioning themselves for a dump pass to allow it to continue to flow. It's the players in support that allow you to kind of achieve in this sport, not so much the player with the ball, which is just, I think, what a magic piece of this sport. It's all about being with you and teams and teammates.
All right, that's an excellent point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Good point.
Okay, I tell you what, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll just jump into a few more questions, including our little rapid fire round with both Gardner and Larry, so stay with us. All right, everybody, welcome back to Navy Sports Central. Carl Darden here with you, and I am joined by Larry Clark, who, by the way, I didn't mention this before, was actually my roommate for a year and a half at the Academy, and also Gardner Howe. They were both Navy Rugby players back when we were at Annapolis, so I really appreciate them being with us here to kind of tell us a little bit more about Navy Rugby and educate us. But right now, I'd like to have both of them talk a little bit about what they've been up to lately. Larry, we'll go ahead and start with you, so fire away.
Yeah, I'm working with my brothers in a business, small business. We have 25 employees called Clark Air Systems. My father started the business in 1975. Mm-hmm. I jumped in about the time my father was transitioning out. I jumped in 1995 after leaving the Navy, and we are involved head first into air quality and air cleaning systems. We provide filtration and air cleaning for hospitals, universities, commercial buildings. And so we have been overwhelmed with COVID issues. And,
I believe it.
It has really challenged the heck out of us. And we've benefited from COVID. Unfortunately, we're one of those businesses that, if you call just doubling your workload a benefit, it has just completely changed our whole business model. So that's where we're at. We still do it all, but with about 25 employees, and we also build air cleaning systems for industry and dust collection systems. Install that, and we have a full service crew that does that work.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I know that the business I was in with energy management, there's a little bit of overlap with when we're talking about air filtration, and then of course I dealt mostly with HVAC systems primarily. So yeah, I definitely know the importance of that, and certainly with everything that's been going on the last couple of years, how more important that's become. So. Nice work there. Really appreciate it. I'm surprised you're still able to do what you do with just 25 people. I'm figuring you would have had to, increase that load a little bit, but good work.
There's some employees that are crying about it right now. We're trying to get some relief.
All right. Gardner, how about you? What have you been up to?
Yeah, so I retired from active duty in 2019, and Aaron and I moved to Newport, Rhode Island. And we're really focused on trying to enjoy retirement. A little bit of work as like a mentor for some of the Department of Defense exercises. Not a lot there, but a little bit involvement there. COVID has certainly had an impact on those exercise series, and then how many of them are being done virtually or now starting to go back into the live world. But most of the time has been spent in supporting some nonprofits that are focused on kind of, I guess, the ones that I'm most interested in are the ones that are somehow related to using the sea or experiences in or on the sea, sailing or on ships for like personal and professional development. And here in Newport, Rhode Island, there's several of them that have been that are good and have survived COVID, and we're looking forward to what 2022 might do for them. So if you or classmates or any of your listeners are ever into the Newport area, please try to look for the Oliver Hazard Perry. It's a modern built, but a traditionally rigged, square rigged ship. And it's got a kind of a neat job to kind of help prepare and expose folks to experiences in the maritime trades and provide opportunities for personal and professional development on board.
All right. Good stuff. And the one thing I do want to mention for our listeners, and I don't want to put Gardner on the spot or anything like that, but I will tell you that there's two groups of classmates that I love bragging about whenever I talk to midshipmen as a blue and gold, future candidates as a blue and gold officer. Number one are classmates that have achieved flag rank and are astronauts. So Gardner obviously falls into that first category. I was wondering if you could just kind of give people a thumbnail sketch of what you did in your career, just to kind of give people a taste of what that experience was like.
You bet. Yeah. Over the course of my time at the Academy, I think I wanted to be everything. I wanted to be an aviator when I got there. We had a bunch of Marines in our company. So by the end of plebe year, I wanted to be a Marine. And then then it was everything, sub, surface. And I ended up wanting to be an aviator. And then my eyes were bad and I had like borderline hypertension. So I couldn't go air. And then it was weird. Leadership detail of a senior year. My leadership detail was up at the Naval Academy Prep School and met an ensign that had been injured at BUDS training to be a SEAL. And so we started chatting that summer. And that eventually led to kind of a decision to go in and become a SEAL. And so I spent my career as a Naval Special Warfare Officer, supporting both the Navy and the Joint Special Operations community, and absolutely had just awesome experiences throughout. Great people, great community, and really enjoyed it. And it's just so funny to think back how serendipitous in some ways it was meeting Rob White, Ensign Rob White, who was a TAD injured BUDS guy recouping from injuries that summer.
Wow.
2 tours, though, that really struck out. I had a chance it was very unexpected, got selected to serve as the president of the War College here in Newport, Rhode Island, which is one of the reasons we ended up back here, because we fell in love with the place while we were here. But I had an amazing experience with the Navy. It was kind of funny. I think it's fair to say that in the Joint Special Operations community, I knew more generals than I did admirals, kind of in my early flag officer years. But then when I was at the college, got re-blued and got to know just about every Navy flag officer because of the outreach of the Naval War College and its impact on the fleet. So that was just a wonderful experience. And then it was very unexpected again, but I ended up in the last assignment was at the CIA. There's a senior military position. Well, I should say it's a military officer that gets detailed to the agency, and you run a shop at the agency that's focused on the integration of efforts between the Department of Defense and the CIA. And just an absolutely fascinating tour. And I tell you, there's an incredible group of Americans that just don't get enough attention, which is probably rightly so, but they don't get enough appreciation for what agency officers do day in, day out for our country.
Yeah, understood. All right. Well, thanks for that, Gardner. I really appreciate it. And like I said, I mean, I have so much fun when I'm one of those folks that, you ever want to get me off topic, all you got to do is bring up the Naval Academy and I'll start talking about it. But like I said, my favorite thing to do when I'm talking to these young men and women who are interested in going to the academy is kind of speaking to, hey, this is what you can achieve. I know people who have gotten here. So that's why it's so much fun to kind of share that with everybody I speak with. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Hey, Carl, question for you.
Yeah.
Do we know how many of our classmates made admiral rank?
I don't know the specific number. I just know, I'm thinking about, in addition to Gardner, obviously, Chris Aquilino is one, Allison Webster Giddings is another. If I had to guess, I would say, well, what do you think, Gardner? Maybe 15 to 20 or so? Do you think that's an accurate number? Or
trying to go through the list in my head, and it's terrible that I don't have that number. That's probably a good ballpark figure. John Noel. Yeah, we can go through the names, but I think that's probably a pretty good figure. And to see Long Aquilino out there leading the Pacific Command in these days is just like, way to go, 84.
Exactly. Yeah, wow. That's for sure. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into this last segment here. As I'm looking at some of these questions, I'm going to toss a couple out just based on some of Larry's answers in terms of how tackling is done. But I've got probably about 6 or 7 that I wanted to ask both of you guys that just to kind of get a sense for the experience that you had and so forth. So first question I have for both of you is, who is your favorite teammate? Obviously, present company accepted.
I'll jump in on that. Gardner was a leader back then. I mean, you could see Admiral in him all the way. I'm not saying that just because he's here. It was, Randy King. I forget some of the names. Bucky DeAndrea was incredibly hard to tackle.
I remember him.
So it's just, and he probably served me my most vicious hit when I took his knee in my thigh and got a deep thigh bruise that put me out for 3 weeks. I wish I broke my leg. It would have been less painful than a deep thigh bruise from Bucky.
Right.
But it had some just great players out there. It was just a team effort, and those rugby parties afterwards, we bonded.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Heavily.
How about you, Gardner?
Yeah, Larry, thanks for mentioning the parties and the social aspect. We really didn't touch on that much, but it's such an integral part of the sport to where you could be out there just wanting to rip the heads off your opponent, and yet afterwards it's all about, in the day we could drink. So you're having a beer out on Hospital Point and singing songs, and just you're the best of buddies. So I'm glad you brought that up. But it's hard to select any one. But since you asked, Carl, I'm going to highlight Doug Baumberger. So Bombs was he was my roommate for it was 2.5 years, maybe 2.5 years, company mate. And Bombs started playing rugby, but then due to some injuries and stuff, could no longer play. But I tell you what, he was at every game, every practice as our manager. But he was much more than a manager. He kind of made everything happen. He kept the whole rugby club moving forward, and did so with this. That's right, we can't cuss on this. So a blank grin on his face, and with an incredible attitude for ensuring that we were always having a good time. And Bomb's still a very dear friend, and doing well. Also in Arizona, by the way.
Oh, okay. I have to keep that in mind. There's a few out here. I've been trying to connect with Randy Gustafson for ages. I mean, the guy lives right across town. We haven't seen each other since I've been out here.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
And if I could jump back in on that, Carl.
Sure.
Pat Buckley was like our quarterback. He was the scrum half.
Uh-huh.
And he passed recently, and we are planning to gather at the Naval Academy for a ceremony coming up in just a month or so. And him at the time he was dating his now wife, and they were fixtures at the rugby parties. Her name Gardner, remember?
Yeah, Jean,
Pat and Jean, they were always there, and Pat was a presence on the field with his California blonde hair, and
no kidding,
because he was the quarterback of the team, the scrum half, as we call it. He touched the ball more than anybody, and liked to hog it a little bit, I thought. But other than that, great teammate.
Right. Okay, so rugby's obviously an outdoor sport, so I was wondering what were some of the most challenging weather conditions you ever had to deal with? And I mean, we talk about how cold it is now, but I'm trying to remember, was it played in the spring primarily or a fall, or, what are some really crazy weather conditions you ended up playing in?
Mud.
Yeah.
There were some amazing mud games. We would get the secondary field. We wouldn't get the pristine football field. They'd give us the backfield at some other outside location, the away games. Mm-hmm. And these fields would sometimes be just puddles and mud, and that's probably one of my favorite memories is just playing in the mud and then diving in the mud after winning, taking pictures of ourselves with mud all over ourselves. So it wasn't a hardship. It was a blast.
Mm-hmm. All right. How about you, Gardner?
Yeah, same. No, there were both fall and spring seasons, but it was always, and Larry pointed it out, the kind of a secondary sport, really, wherever you were playing, and so you were always on whatever field you could get, not always in the best of conditions. It made for some very fun conditions, so mud.
Right. Okay, so maybe this kind of falls within that conversation as well, but I'm wondering, what was the craziest play or series of events that you've ever witnessed on a rugby field? And Gardner, we'll start with you.
I remember Joe Rixey, who was an inside center on the 83, class 83. And Joe, I'm pretty sure he was a quarterback in high school. And so he used to have this play. We mentioned that you can't throw the ball forward. That's why you see all the lateral passes. And Carl, you had mentioned earlier in a previous conversation about it, it's a kind of an awkward, oversized ball. But Joe was able to throw like a spiral pass at times all the way out to the wing.
Wow.
And as Larry pointed out, if part of the strategy is trying to create that overlap of offense versus defenders, and one quick way to do that is to get the ball super quick out to your wing, because then you're defended only by the wing, and if you've got another player in support, then you can quickly have a 2-on-1. And then as soon as their defensive player commits to a tackle, you dump the ball off and off you go. So we had some plays that we get the ball out to Joe at inside center, and then he would just pivot and throw this like spiral, lateral, or backwards pass out to the wing, and then the outside center and the wing, or the wing and the fullback were then just hauling downfield. And we would you don't see that hardly at all, but Joe could make it work because he could throw a pass with that damn big ball.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
How about you, Larry?
Well, I just have to say I got humbled by that team quite a bit. I was a middle linebacker in high school football, and I made the county all-star team as a middle linebacker, but I couldn't tackle some of those wingers on the 83 team. Mm-hmm. They would stiff arm you in the middle of the chest and accelerate through the stiff arm. And it was, I don't remember. Do you remember his name, Gardner, the one winger on the 83 team?
Yeah, so there was Mikey Coughlin and Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah. Mikey Coughlin's the one I'm thinking of, who was just an exceptional stiff armor. Mm-hmm. And, I can just still picture myself grasping air and him accelerating past me at time, trying to tackle him, and he was gone. Wow. So the humility that brought to my life was quite exceptional.
Well, there's definitely an art to stiff arming. I mean, to the extent that I've seen it in regular American football, it's you get that down, and you can take full advantage of that for sure.
Absolutely.
All right. So the one thing I wanted to ask both of you is, let's say both of you were on the team that won the regional championship, I believe, in '83.
Well, I was on the B team, so I played against those guys in practice.
Okay.
I think Gardner played on the field, right, Gardner?
Yeah, and I think I was injured for the actual championship. It's kind of weird. I'm pretty sure it was a late hit by an Air Force guy, messed up my face a little bit, and then I was out for the actual championship game. But yeah, the 83 team was a great team.
Yeah. So first of all, who did you guys play in the championship game? And even though you weren't able to participate because of injury, what was your best memory from that game, aside from obviously coming out on the right end of the score?
Yeah. So I'll take the latter part first. What I remember about that team is that out of the 15 players, there were probably 10 or 11 of them that were 83 that ended up playing on the A side throughout that, over the course of that year. There were some 84s, some of us that played either occasionally or had a couple of the positions. But those guys had, a couple of them I think had played some rugby before the academy, but not all of them. Most were probably like Larry and I, we were rejected other varsity athletes that found their way to the rugby club, but they came with a great set of athletic skills, landed with a great group of people, and then those guys had developed together as a team for 4 years. So kind of that confluence of some great athletes, great personalities, and they had 4 years together, and they stayed together where they had most of the positions of that varsity side locked in for that season. And I think that's what made them so noteworthy.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So the other cool thing was that the 83 team was inducted into the Navy Rugby Alumni Association Hall of Fame. So Gardner, I was wondering if you could kind of track their path to the championship, that Eastern Region Championship, and then what happened afterwards.
Yeah. So the Easterns were in the Eastern Championships were held over 2 different weekends in the spring. In the first one, the 83 team met Fordham as a first opponent and to beat them 30-3. That led to a second game that weekend against Princeton, and 12-0. So only 3 points scored against them in the first half of the Easterns tournament. And then a couple of weekends later, University of Massachusetts in the semifinal game. Beat them 24-6, and that led to the championship game against James Madison, and 22-13.
All right.
So a pretty dominating play against the Eastern competitors. So each of the regional championships then went to nationals. It was played May 7th and 8th. The May 7th game was our first game there against the Air Force. And we lost to the Zoomies 6-3. So a tough loss, but a great program out there. and that led to the semi or the runner-up game against University of Illinois. And 32-3, Navy took it for third in the nation that year.
Okay. All right. And I guess the other thing worth pointing out is that you're basically a club team, presumably competing against a mix of other club and varsity, because I'm assuming that there's going to have some of those schools are going to be varsity level sports. Am I right?
Yeah, back then, and Larry, I don't know what you remember, but I remember there were a couple of colleges that recruited and had scholarships. I don't know that they called themselves varsity sports at the time, but I know they definitely recruited athletes, which is, and then today there's the Army program is varsity. I believe the Air Force program is varsity. Other colleges continue to provide scholarships and varsity level support to the clubs. And that's why it's so important for the Navy initiative to succeed here in the near term.
That's how I remember it as well, Gardner. It's just I didn't think they called themselves varsity, but they recruited. They I don't know how the money flowed, but they got the best players out there in California, the UCal and
yeah, for sure.
Right, out of Cal, and then what was it, Life College down in Georgia, and I remember those guys having a bunch of South Africans.
Yes, all those Invictus guys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that a chiropractic college or something like that?
Yeah, that's right. They could take care of themselves.
Right. All right, guys. Hey, listen, that's going to do it for our conversation. And I got to tell you, this was a whole lot of fun for two reasons. Number one, connecting with both of you, obviously. And number two, for giving me a little bit of an education on the sport of rugby. And it's certainly one that'll be kind of keeping my eye out for moving forward. So thank you so much for joining me, Larry Clark and Gardner Howe. I really, really appreciate it.
Wonderful time. I had a great time.
Yeah. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate, again, the spotlight on what a great sport at the Naval Academy.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. You take care. Okay, we're going to step away for a quick break and come back with our question of the day and mid-watch segments. So don't go anywhere. All right, thanks for staying with us here on Navy Sports Central. And now let's get to our question of the day. First, we're going to go ahead and check our responses from the question in our last episode. And you may recall that after the Mids swept the 4-star matches that first week in February, I'd asked what's the most number of stars that Navy has won in the series over the course of 1 year. And the choices were 16, 17, 18, or 19 stars. After looking at the responses, the top vote getter was 19. There were 6 people who went with that choice. Next was 18 with 3 votes, followed by 16, which got 1. Now, it turns out that the correct answer, which is 17 stars, didn't get any votes at all. And the Mids actually hit that number on 6 different occasions. The first time was actually in 1983, and the most recent time was in 2012. So there's your answer. And just so you know, right now, with the Mids picking up the wins in men's basketball and also wrestling, that puts their number for this year at 15. So there's a pretty decent chance they could raise that bar a little bit, but I don't want to jinx them, so we'll just kind of see how things play out from here. I will say that during the spring sports, they tend to do pretty well, though. All right, now let's get to our question for this week. And, of course, today we're focused on rugby. You heard my old roommate Larry Clark mention earlier that there is no forward passing in rugby, and I don't know if that's just the way they wanted it in the rules or it's because the way the rugby ball is designed. If you guys have gotten a good look at it, you'll notice that the ends of a rugby ball are a lot flatter, which of course makes it less aerodynamic. But the dimension that really makes it difficult to execute a forward pass is its circumference, particularly the short circumference, which is the one around the middle of the ball. If you look at the short circumference of a standard NFL football, it's about 21 inches to about 21 and a quarter, somewhere in there. So our question of the day for today is, what is the short circumference for a rugby ball? And here are your choices. Between 21 and a half and 21 and 3/4 inches, greater than 21 and 3/4 and less than 22 and a quarter, greater than 22 and a quarter and less than 22 and 3/4. And then the last choice is more than 22 and 3/4 inches. So there are your choices. Go ahead and take your best shot at that one and let us know your answer by responding on the Navy Sports Nation group Facebook page. It'll be up in the form of a poll question no later than the end of the day. So I look forward to hearing from as many rugby fans as possible. And even if you're not familiar with the game, go ahead and throw out a guess and see if you get it right. You never know. Okay, now let's finish things up by checking in with our two athletes on the mid-watch. The first is Molly Mangan from the women's track team. This is a pretty easy update because she's been busy preparing for the Patriot League Championships, which actually take place this weekend. Molly did run in the Darius Dixon Invitational a couple of weeks ago. That was the meet following the Star meet with Army. It included some really strong competition from the ACC as well as some other schools along the East Coast. Molly ran in two races. One was the 400 meters, and she also ran the anchor leg of the 4x400 meter relay. And there, Navy finished seventh in a field of over 20 teams that included programs like Virginia Tech, Penn, Duke, and Wake Forest. So look for her to run both the 400 and the 4x400 meter relay at the Patriot League Championships. You may also see Molly in the 200 meters as well. I'm not really sure. They have a pretty good amount of depth at that distance, so they may not need her there. Okay, now let's wrap things up with Navy wrestler Andrew Cerniglia's performance in the Star match against Army. If you heard our last podcast, you'd know that I was particularly interested in this match at 157 pounds because Cerniglia is going to be going against Army's Marcus Hartman, and he was ranked 23rd nationally going into the meet, while Cerniglia was ranked 25th. Anyway, a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that in last year's Star matchup at West Point, Hartman could not compete due to an injury, and Cerniglia beat his replacement pretty easily to nail down the Star and end a 4-game losing streak for Navy. Now, one of the guys calling the match for Army kept yapping about the fact that if Hartman was healthy, the Black Knights would have had that 5th straight Star. And that really kind of ticked me off because it told me that he had no clue about Cerniglia's ability and, what kind of wrestler he was, other than the fact that he was a freshman. Now, I don't know if any of that got back to him. In fact, I think Cerniglia is the kind of competitor that it really wouldn't have mattered anyway. He doesn't need any additional motivation to get ready for that match. The fact that it was Army-Navy was plenty. All that being said, I couldn't help but wonder what Cerniglia was thinking about as he was going through his pre-match routine. The Mids were already down 6-0 after having lost the first two hard-fought matches. And now he's about ready to square off against Hartman in one of the key matches of the meet. And for some reason, I flashed on, I don't know if you guys listened to Kevin Hart's comedy at all, but a while back he had this one bit that I thought was really funny. And he was relating a story about when his mom let him swear for the first time. This was in response to a note that the teacher sent home with Kevin questioning her parenting skills because he was a little bit out of control in class. So she got a little annoyed, and she basically tells him that what he can say back to her, and that included the use of one swear word. So the next day, Kevin is in line walking into the room with his classmates, and the teacher's at the door greeting them. And when he gets to her, she says, "Kevin," and he comes back and says, "Miss Green." And she says, "Did you give your mother the note?" And he comes back and tells her, "Yes, I did." And then she says, "Well, what did she say?" And then that's when he turns to his classmates and says to him, "It's about to go down." Now, it goes on from there, and he launches into this tirade, which included way more than one swear word. But I guess my point is I'm thinking about Cerniglia as he's getting ready to step onto the mat. I mean, I can clearly picture him just looking over at Coach Kola and the rest of the team and just telling him, "It's about to go down," because it definitely did. The match was pretty tight in the first period. I believe Cerniglia went ahead 4-2 right at the very end of the first period with a takedown, and then Hartman evened up the match with a reversal. With a takedown at 4-4, but then right towards I guess it was about the middle of the second period, that's when Cerniglia started to take control. He got a reversal to go up 6-4, and then he scored 2 more points on another reversal in the third period to go up 8-4. And from there, he won going away. I think Hartman got hit with a point for stalling, and then Cerniglia had more riding time. So the final score was 10-4, and that's what got the Mids on the board. And from there, the momentum just started building. I mean, they won the next match to even things up, and I think they lost the fifth match, but then they won the last 5, like I'd mentioned earlier, to close things out 22-9. Next up, Cerniglia and the Mids have the EIWA Regionals on March 5th and 6th. Last year, the team finished second, so it'd be pretty awesome to see if they could take the team title this season. That's going to do it for this edition of Navy Sports Central. Thank you all so much for joining us. Now, if you like what you've heard, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and remember to spread the word to all the other Navy fans out there. Thanks again to my classmates Gardner Howe and Larry Clark for giving us a crash course on Navy Rugby. I really appreciate their perspective. We have been getting a great response to our question of the day, so if you want to jump in on that, just go to the Navy Sports Nation group Facebook page. I will go ahead and pin it to the top so you won't miss it. And just a quick reminder, the views expressed on Navy Sports Central are my own and do not reflect those of the U.S. Naval Academy or Navy Athletics. By the way, the music used in Navy Sports Central comes to you courtesy of Audio Jungle. This is a great site for purchasing the rights to use music from thousands of artists around the world, and those we feature in the podcast will be credited in our show notes. Talk to you soon, everybody. Until next time, this is Carl Darden. Go Navy, beat Army.